Marcus Chen walked into the Rosewood Hotel at exactly 5 in the evening. Just like he had done every single day for the past 11 years, the security guard at the front door gave him a small nod, and Marcus nodded back without saying a word. This was their routine conversation. No small talk, just a simple acknowledgement that Marcus existed. He made his way through the grand lobby with its tall marble columns and golden chandeliers that sparkled like 1,000 tiny stars. His shoes made soft sounds on the polished floor as he walked toward the corner where the black Steinway piano sat waiting. For him, the piano had been his companion for more than a decade now. It knew all his secrets, all his dreams, and all his disappointments. Marcus was 53 years old, and his hair had turned gray at the temples. His fingers were still strong and flexible, the fingers of a man who had spent his entire life touching piano keys. His eyes told a different story. They were the eyes of someone who had given up on something important a long time ago. He sat down on the piano bench and adjusted his simple black jacket. The hotel required him to dress formally, so he always wore the same outfit: black pants, white shirt, black jacket. Nothing fancy, nothing that would draw attention, because that was exactly what Marcus had become over the years. Someone who did not draw attention. He was background noise. He was the pleasant sound that filled the lobby while rich guests checked into their expensive rooms. He was the music that played while businessmen talked about million-dollar deals and tourists took photos of the beautiful interior. Nobody really listened to him. Nobody really saw him. Marcus placed his fingers on the keys and began to play a soft melody by Debussy. Notes floated through the air like gentle whispers. A woman in a red dress walked past him, her high heels clicking on the marble floor. She was talking loudly on her phone about a dinner reservation. She did not look at Marcus. A few minutes later, a family with 2 young children came through the lobby. The kids were running and laughing, and the parents were trying to control them. They did not look at Marcus either. This was normal. This was every single evening of his life. Marcus remembered a time when things were different. He remembered being 22 years old and full of hope and fire. He had been a student at Juilliard, one of the most famous music schools in the entire world. His professors had called him gifted. They had said he had the potential to become one of the great pianists of his generation. Mother had cried tears of joy when he got accepted into the school. Shay was a poor woman who worked 2 jobs to support Marcus and his younger sister. She had sacrificed everything so that her son could follow his dream, and for 3 wonderful years, Marcus had lived that dream. He had practiced for 8 hours every day. He had performed in student concerts and received standing ovations. He had felt the magic of music flowing through his veins like electricity. But then everything changed. Months before his graduation, his mother got sick, very sick. The doctors said she needed expensive treatments that their insurance would not cover. Marcus had to make a choice. He could stay at Juilliard and graduate and hope that his mother would somehow survive. He could leave school and get a job and pay for her medical bills. It was not really a choice at all. Marcus left Juilliard and never went back. He found work playing piano at restaurants and hotels and small bars. He played at weddings and birthday parties and corporate events. He made enough money to pay for his mother's treatment, but it was not enough to save her. She died 2 years later, holding his hand in a hospital room that smelled like cleaning chemicals. Her last words to him were, "I am so proud of you." Marcus had carried those words with him for 30 years now. They were both a comfort and a wound that never healed after his mother died. Marcus tried to return to his music career. He auditioned for orchestras and applied to performance programs, but doors that had once been open to him were now closed. He was too old. They said he had been away from serious music for too long. He did not have the right connections anymore, so Marcus accepted his fate here, became a lobby pianist at the Rosewood Hotel, and he had stayed there ever since. The pay was decent, and the work was steady. Had a small apartment about 20 minutes away by Bush. Had a cat named Beethoven who waited for him to come home every night. He had a life that was comfortable and predictable and completely empty of the dreams he once had. A night like every other night, Marcus played through his usual selection of songs. He played some Chopin, some Mozart, some gentle jazz standards that the hotel guests seemed to enjoy. Around 7 o'clock, a young couple came and stood near the piano for a few minutes. They smiled at him and swayed to the music for a brief moment. Marcus felt something warm in his chest, but then the couple walked away, and the warmth faded. At 8 o'clock, Marcus took his 15-minute break. He went to the small staff room behind the kitchen and poured himself a cup of coffee. Rosa was there, a middle-aged woman from Guatemala who worked as a housekeeper. She was eating a sandwich and looking tired. "Hey, Marcus," she said with a friendly smile. "How is the music tonight?" "Same as always," Marcus replied. Sitting down across from her, Rosa nodded and took another bite of her sandwich. She understood what he meant. She had been working at the hotel for almost as long as Marcus had. They had become friends over the years, bonded by their shared invisibility. Rosa worked 12 shifts most days. She cleaned rooms and changed sheets and scrubbed bathrooms. Did all of this so she could send money back to her mother and sisters in Guatemala. She never complained. Not once. Marcus admired her strength. Darnell came into the staff room a few minutes later. He was a young man in his late 20s who worked as a valet, parking cars for the wealthy guests. Darnell was saving every penny he earned to pay for his daughter's college education. The little girl was only 7 years old, But Darnell was already planning for her future. "What's up, Marcus?" Darnell said, grabbing a bottle of water from the refrigerator, just taking a break. Marcus said. Darnell sat down and let out a long sigh. "Some of these guests are something else," he said, shaking his head. "This one guy in a Ferrari got mad at me because I didn't open his door fast enough." Rosa and Marcus exchanged a knowing look. They had all experienced the rudeness of certain guests. It was part of the job, but in this small staff room, they were equals. They were human beings who saw each other and respected each other. That meant something to Marcus. It meant more than he could ever express in words. After his break, Marcus returned to the piano and played for another 3 hours. When the clock struck 11, his shift was over. He closed the piano lid gently, said goodbye to the night security guard, and walked out into the cold December air. The city was alive with lights and sounds and people rushing to get somewhere important. Marcus walked to the bus stop and waited. He thought about his mother and his time at Juilliard and all the years that had passed since then. He thought about the concert halls he would never perform in and the audiences he would never move to tears. Then the bus came, and Marcus got on, and he pushed those thoughts back into the quiet corner of his mind where they always lived. Tomorrow would be another day, just like today, just like yesterday, just like all the days that came before, or so he thought. It was a cold December evening, and the Rosewood Hotel was buzzing with activity. Marcus could feel the tension in the air. The moment he walked through the front door, staff members were rushing around with worried expressions on their faces, were polishing surfaces that were already spotless. Managers were speaking into their phones with serious voices. Big was happening tonight. Marcus made his way to his usual spot near the piano, but he did not sit down right away. He watched the chaos unfolding around him with quiet curiosity. A young staff member named Kevin ran past him carrying a stack of white tablecloths. Marcus called out, "What is going on tonight?" Kevin stopped for a second, his face red and sweaty. "The Whitmore Foundation Gala," he said quickly. 300 of the richest people in the city are coming here in a few hours." Then he was gone, disappearing into the ballroom where the event would take place. Had heard of the Whitmore Foundation before. It was one of the most prestigious charitable organizations in the country. They donated millions of dollars every year to education and the arts. Their annual gala was famous for attracting billionaires and celebrities and powerful politicians. It was exactly the kind of event where Marcus would normally be invisible. He would play his soft background music in the lobby while the important people gathered in the ballroom. That was his place in the world. He had accepted it long ago. Marcus sat down at the piano and began to warm up his fingers with some simple A familiar feel of the keys calmed him down no matter what chaos was happening around him. The piano was always steady and reliable. About an hour later, Marcus noticed a commotion near the front desk. Mr. Henderson, the hotel manager, was pacing back and forth with his phone pressed to his ear. His face was pale, and he looked like he might be sick. "This is a disaster," Mr. Henderson was saying into the phone. "What do you mean they are not coming?" Marcus could not hear the other side of the conversation, but he could tell it was bad news. Mr. Henderson ended the call and stood there for a moment, staring at nothing. Then he turned and looked around the lobby with desperate eyes. His gaze landed on Marcus for a moment. Marcus thought Mr. Henderson was going to walk right past him like everyone else always did, but instead, the manager came straight toward him with quick, nervous steps. "You," Mr. Henderson said, pointing at Marcus. "You play piano?" Marcus blinked in surprise. "You, sir," he replied. "I have been playing here for 11 years, right?" "Right," Mr. Henderson said, waving his hand impatiently. "Listen, we have a situation." The manager explained what had happened. The string quartet that was supposed to perform at the Whitmore Foundation Gala had just cancelled their. The lead violinist had gotten into a car accident and was in the hospital. The other musicians refused to perform without her. 300 of the most important people in the city would arrive in less than 2 hours, and there was no entertainment. Mr. Henderson looked at Marcus with a mixture of hope and doubt. "Can you do it?" he asked. "Can you play for the gala?" Marcus felt his heart beat faster. This was the kind of opportunity he had dreamed about 30 years ago, a chance to perform for an audience that actually mattered, a chance to be more than background noise. But then Mr. Henderson continued speaking, and the excitement in Marcus's chest began to fade. "Just play something simple," the manager said dismissively. "Background music, you know, nothing too fancy or complicated. We just need someone to fill the silence so it does not feel awkward." Marcus thought, there it is. He was not being asked to perform. He was being asked to exist quietly in the corner while rich people talked and laughed and ignored him. It was exactly the same job he had been doing for 11 years, just in a fancier room. "Can you do it or not?" Mr. Henderson asked impatiently. Marcus looked at the manager's face. He saw the stress and the fear and the desperation. He also saw something else. He saw that Mr. Henderson did not believe Marcus was capable of anything special. To this man, Marcus was just a tool, a piece of furniture that happened to make pleasant sounds. Marcus said quietly, "I can do it." "Good," Mr. Henderson said, already turning away. "Be in the ballroom by 7. And remember, keep it simple." The manager rushed off to deal with other problems, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts. Sat at the piano for a long time without playing a single note. He thought about the words Mr. Henderson had used. Simple music, nothing fancy. These were the words that had defined his life, or the past 11 years, these were the words that had slowly killed the fire inside him. There was a time when Marcus believed he was meant for greatness. Professors at Juilliard had told him he had a gift. They had said his playing could make people feel things they had never felt before, but somewhere along the way, Marcus had stopped believing that he had accepted his role as the invisible man at the piano. He had stopped trying to be heard. The hours passed. Slowly Marcus went to the staff room to eat his dinner alone. He thought about what he would play tonight. Probably the same songs he always played. Safe songs. Songs that nobody would remember. Around 6 o'clock, Rosa came into the staff room to take her break. She sat down across from Marcus and noticed the strange look on his face. "What is wrong?" she asked with concern in her voice. Marcus told her about the gala and Mr. Henry's requests. He told her about being asked to play simple background music for 300 important people. Rosa listened carefully. Then she reached across the table and touched his hand. "Marcus," she said softly, "I have heard you play many times when you think nobody is listening. You play differently. You play like someone who has a story to tell." Marcus looked at her with surprise. He did not know anyone had ever noticed. Rosa smiled at him. She said, "Maybe tonight is the night you tell that story." Before Marcus could respond, Rosa stood up and went back to work. Her words stayed with him like a warm blanket on a cold night. At 6:30, Marcus put on his best black jacket and walked toward the ballroom. The room had been transformed into a winter wonderland. Flowers covered every table. Silver decorations hung from the ceiling like frozen raindrops. A massive Christmas tree stood in the corner, covered with thousands of tiny lights, and in the center of it all was a beautiful grand piano waiting for him. Marcus walked slowly toward the instrument. His footsteps echoed in the empty room. He sat down on the bench and placed his fingers on the keys. The piano was magnificent. It was a Steinway Model D, the same kind of piano used in the greatest concert halls in the world. Marcus had not played an instrument this fine in over 30 years. He pressed a single key and listened to the note ring out through the ballroom. The sound was pure and perfect. It filled the room and seemed to touch something deep inside Marcus's chest. He thought about his mother and her sacrifice. He thought about leaving Juilliard and watching his dreams fade away. He thought about 11 years of being invisible, and then he thought about Rosa's words, "Maybe tonight is the night you tell that story." Staff members began to enter the ballroom to make final preparations. They moved around Marcus like water flowing around a rock. None of them spoke to him. None of them asked what he was planning to play. He was just the background music. At exactly 7 o'clock, the first guests began to arrive. They were dressed in expensive suits and beautiful gowns. Diamonds sparkled around the necks and wrists of elegant women. The men carried themselves with the confidence that comes from having more money than most people could ever imagine. Watched them enter the room. He watched them greet each other with air kisses and firm handshakes. He watched them completely ignore the piano, and the man sitting at it, Mr. Henderson, appeared beside him for a brief moment. The manager whispered, "Keep it simple." Then he was gone. Rushing off to welcome the important guests, Marcus placed his fingers on the keys. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest. He had a choice to make. He could play the safe songs, the quiet songs, the forgettable songs. He could be the background noise that everyone expected him to be, or he could do something different. He could do something that scared him. He could finally, after 30 years of silence, let himself be heard. Marcus took a deep breath and closed his eyes, and in that moment, he made his decision. Marcus sat at the grand piano with his eyes still closed. Sounds of the ballroom washed over him like waves on a beach. He could hear glasses clinking and people laughing and the rustle of expensive fabric. He could smell perfume and cologne mixing together in the air, but in his mind, Marcus was somewhere else entirely. He was standing at a crossroads, and he knew that whatever he did next would change everything. For 30 years, Marcus had played it safe. He had hidden his true abilities behind soft melodies and gentle rhythms. He had convinced himself that this was enough, that being invisible was acceptable, that his dreams did not matter anymore. But Rosa's words kept echoing in his head. "Maybe tonight is the night you tell that story." What the story did he have to tell? Marcus thought about this question as he sat in silence. He thought about his childhood in a small apartment where money was always tight. He thought about his mother working 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. He remembered the day she brought home an old keyboard she had found at a garage sale. It was missing 3 keys and the sound was terrible, but to young Marcus, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. He had taught himself to play on that broken keyboard night after night. He would sit in his tiny bedroom and practice until his fingers hurt. His mother would stand in the doorway and watch him with tears in her eyes. He knew her son had something special inside him. Opened his eyes and looked around the ballroom. The wealthy guests were settling into their seats at the fancy tables. Waiters in crisp white uniforms were serving appetizers and filling wine glasses. Nobody was looking at him. Nobody cared what he was about to do. Somehow this made Marcus feel free. He had spent so many years worrying about what other people thought of him. He had spent so many years trying to meet everyone's expectations, but tonight, in this room full of strangers who did not even know his name, Marcus realized something important. He had nothing to lose. The worst thing that could happen was that he would be fired from a job that made him feel invisible anyway. The best thing that could happen was something he could not even imagine. looked toward the entrance of the ballroom and saw Rosa peeking through the door. She was supposed to be working upstairs, but she had come down to see him. Their eyes met across the crowded room. Rosa gave him a small nod and a smile. It was a simple gesture, but it meant everything to Marcus. She believed in him. Behind Rosa, Marcus could see Darnell standing in the hallway. The young valet had also come to watch, and there were others too. Faces Marcus recognized from the staff room, the housekeepers and the kitchen workers and the security guards. These were the people who had become his family over the past 11 years. These were the people who actually saw him, who knew his name, who cared about his well-being. They had all come to support him. Marcus felt a warmth spread through his chest. He understood now who he was playing for. Tonight he was not playing for the rich guests in their expensive clothes. He was not playing for Mr. Henderson or the Whitmore Foundation. He was playing for Rosa, who sent every extra dollar to her family in Guatemala. Who was playing for Darnell, who dreamed of giving his daughter a better life. He was playing for all the invisible people who worked behind the scenes to make this beautiful hotel run. He was playing for his mother, who had sacrificed everything so that he could have a chance, and he was playing for himself, for the young man who had once believed he could change the world with music, for the student who had to leave his dreams behind, for the 53-year-old man who had forgotten what it felt like to be truly alive. Marcus straightened his back and rolled his shoulders. He stretched his fingers and felt the familiar tension in his joints. 30 years was a long time to keep a fire burning inside you, but somehow, against all odds, the flame was still there. It had never gone out completely. It had just been waiting for the right moment to blaze. Again the noise in the ballroom grew louder. As more guests arrived, a woman in a blue dress bumped into the piano. Without apologizing, a man with gray hair stood nearby, talking loudly on his cell phone. These people did not know that something extraordinary was about to happen. They did not know that the quiet man at the piano was about to show them something real. Marcus thought about the piece he was going to play, Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was one of the most difficult and beautiful pieces ever written for piano. It was also deeply personal to Marcus. He had played this piece at his final student concert at Juilliard 3 months before he had to leave. He had not performed it publicly since then. For 30 years, he had only played it alone in his apartment. Late at night, when no one could hear it, was his secret, his treasure, his connection to the person he used to beat night. He would share it with the world, or at least with the 300 people in this ballroom. Mr. Henderson walked past Marcus one more time. The manager did not stop or say anything. He just glanced at Marcus with an expression that said, "Do not mess this up." Marcus almost smiled. Mr. Henderson had asked for simple background music. He had asked for something that would fill the silence without demanding attention. He was about to get something very different. The clock on the wall showed 7:15. Cocktail hour was in full swing. This was the moment when background music was supposed to start. Marcus placed his hands on the keys. He could feel the smooth ivory beneath his fingertips. He could feel his heart beating steady and strong. He thought about his mother one more time. "I am so proud of you." She had said those words had haunted him for 30 years. He had never felt worthy of them. He had never felt like he had done anything to deserve her pride, but maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. Marcus took one final breath. He looked at the faces of his friends near the door, Rosa and Darnell and the others. They were watching him with hope in their eyes. They did not know what he was about to play. They did not know that he had once been a star at the most famous music school in America. They only knew that he was their friend, and they wanted him to succeed. That was enough. That was more than enough. Marcus closed his eyes and let the world fade away. There was no ballroom, no wealthy guests, no pressure, no expectations. There was only the music. There was only the story he had been carrying inside him for 30 years. There was only the truth he had been too afraid to speak. And finally, after so much time and so much silence, Marcus Chen was ready to let it out. His fingers pressed down on the keys. The first notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the ballroom, and nothing would ever be the same again. The first notes floated into the air like a whisper. They were soft and gentle, almost hesitant, like someone testing the water before diving in. A few guests near the piano glanced over with mild curiosity, then returned to their conversations. This was normal. This was expected. Background music was supposed to be ignoble, but Marcus was just getting started. The opening of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor begins. Quietly, it tells a story of someone looking back on memories, of longing for something lost. The melody is simple at first, almost like a folk song, but underneath it runs a current of deep emotion. Marcus played these opening bars with his eyes closed. His fingers moved across the keys with a gentleness that surprised even him. Each note was a word, and he was speaking a language he had almost forgotten. The woman in the blue dress who had bumped into the piano earlier stopped mid-sentence. She turned her head slowly, as if she had heard something unexpected. Her companion, a man in an expensive gray suit, also paused. "What is that?" the woman whispered. The man shrugged, but he too was listening now. As Marcus moved into the second theme of the ballad, the music began to change. The gentle whisper transformed into something stronger, more urgent. The notes came faster and with more force. This was the moment in the piece where the storyteller reveals the first hint of tragedy. Something beautiful was lost, something precious was taken away, and now, all these years later, The pain is still there. Waiter carrying a tray of champagne glasses stopped walking. He stood in the middle of the ballroom, frozen, listening. The champagne bubbles rose and popped silently as the music swelled around him at table 7. A couple in their 60s had been arguing quietly about something. The woman was upset, and the man was defensive, but as Marcus's music filled the room, they both fell silent. The woman reached across the table and took her husband's hand. They looked at each other with something soft in their eyes. Whatever they had been fighting about suddenly seemed less important. Near the entrance, Rosa pressed her hand against her chest. She could feel the music reaching into her heart. It reminded her of her grandmother back in Guatemala. Her grandmother used to sing old songs about love and loss and hope. Rosa had not thought about those songs in years, but now, listening to Marcus's play, she could hear her grandmother's voice as clearly as if she was standing beside her. The conversations in the ballroom were dying down one by one. It was like watching candles being blown out in a dark room. First one table fell silent, then another. People were turning in their seats to look at the piano. They were trying to understand what they were hearing. This was not background music. This was not simple or forgettable. It was something else entirely. Marcus reached the first climax of the piece, where the music builds to a passionate outpouring of emotion. His fingers flew across the keys with speed and precision. The sound filled every corner of the ballroom. It bounced off the crystal chandeliers and the marble floors. It wrapped around the guests like a warm embrace. A woman near the front of the room began to cry. She did not know why she was crying. The tears just came flowing down her cheeks and dripping onto her expensive silk dress. Her friend handed her a napkin without saying a word. They both understood that something special was happening at the back of the ballroom. Mr. Henderson stood with his mouth hanging open. He had told Marcus to keep it simple. He had expected soft, pleasant, forgettable music, and he was witnessing something that looked like magic. The hotel manager did not know anything about classical music. He could not name the piece Marcus was playing, but he knew, deep in his bones, that this was extraordinary. For the first time in 11 years, Mr. Henderson actually saw Marcus Chun. He saw a man transformed by his art. He saw passion and pain and beauty all mixed together. He saw someone who had been hiding a tremendous gift in plain sight. Marcus was no longer aware of the ballroom or the guests or anything else. He was lost in the music, swimming in a river of notes and memories. He remembered the day he received his acceptance letter from Juilliard. He had run home from school with the envelope clutched in his hand. His mother had opened it with shaking fingers. When she read the words, she had screamed with joy and lifted Marcus off the ground. It was the happiest day of her life. It was one of the happiest days of his life too. Marcus played through this memory, letting the joy flow through his fingers, but then the music shifted again. As Chopin intended, the joy faded into something darker and more complex. Marcus remembered the phone call that changed everything. His mother's doctor, speaking in a calm and terrible voice, the diagnosis, the prognosis, the cost of treatment. Marcus remembered sitting in his dorm room at Juilliard, staring at the wall. He remembered the impossible choice he had to make: dream or family, future or present, music or love. He had chosen love. He had always believed it was the right choice, but that did not make the pain go away. That did not erase the loss of everything he had worked for. Marcus played through this memory too. The music became heavy with grief and sacrifice. Notes tumbled over each other like tears falling from tired eyes in the ballroom. More people were crying now. They did not know Marcus's story. They did not know about Juilliard or his mother or his 30 years of invisibility, but they could feel the truth in his playing. Music has a way of speaking directly to the soul. It bypasses words and logic and goes straight to the heart, and Marcus's heart was pouring out onto those piano keys. Every disappointment, every regret, every moment of loneliness, it was all there in the music. But there was something else too there. What hope there was? The stubborn belief that life could still be beautiful despite everything. There was the knowledge that love, in the end, was always worth the sacrifice. As Marcus approached the middle section of the ballade, the music softened again. This part of the piece is like catching your breath after a storm. It is quiet and reflective, a moment of peace before the final journey. Marcus, who opened his eyes for just a second, he looked out at the ballroom and saw something he had never seen before. A single person was watching him. 300 pairs of eyes focused on the piano. 300 people holding their breath. 300 hearts beating in rhythm with his music. The champagne sat untouched in the glasses. The appetizers grew cold on the plates. The waiters stood motionless against the walls. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody wanted to break the spell. Near the door, Darnell had tears running down his face. He was thinking about his daughter. He was thinking about all the sacrifices he made every day so she could have a better future. He understood Marcus's music in a way that surprised him. It was speaking to him, telling him that his sacrifices mattered. It was telling him that love was the most important thing in the world. Rosa was crying too, thinking about her family so far away. The kitchen workers had gathered in the doorway, watching in amazement. Heaven, the security guards had come closer, drawn by the irresistible pull of the music. Marcus saw all of this, and his heart swelled with emotion. He had played in this hotel for 11 years without being seen. Finally, people were seeing him. They were hearing him. They were feeling what he felt, and this was only the beginning. Ballade was not finished yet. The most powerful moments were still to come. Marcus closed his eyes again and let his fingers lead the way. The music grew in intensity, building towards something magnificent. Every person in that ballroom knew, without understanding how they knew, that they were witnessing something they would remember for the rest of their lives. The ballroom had become a cathedral of silence. 300 people sat frozen in their seats like statues made of flesh and bone. The only sound in the entire room was the music flowing from Marcus's fingers. It filled every corner, every space, every heart. The Chopin ballad was now moving into its most emotional section. This was the part of the piece that separated good pianists from great ones. It required not just technical skill but the ability to pour your entire soul into the keys. Marcus had both. The melody rose and fell like ocean waves. It crashed against invisible shores with tremendous power. Then it pulled back, gentle and tender, before building again. A man at table 12, a successful banker who had not cried since he was a boy, felt hot tears streaming down his face. He did not try to wipe them away. He did not feel embarrassed. He simply let them fall as the music washed over him. Beside him, his wife reached for his hand. They had been married for 32 years. In all that time, she had never seen her husband cry, but she understood the music was doing something to everyone in the room. It was breaking down walls that people had built around their hearts. It was reaching into the deepest parts of their souls and touching wounds they had forgotten they had. Marcus was no longer playing the piano was playing him. His body moved with the music like a leaf carried by the wind. His eyes remained closed, and his face showed every emotion the piece contained. Loss, hope, love, despair, triumph. It was all there, written across his features like a story told in flesh. A young woman at table 3 was gripping her napkin so tightly her knuckles had turned white. She was thinking about her father, who had died 6 months ago. They had been estranged for years because of a stupid argument. She could barely remember. She had never gotten the chance to say goodbye. She had never gotten the chance to say she was sorry. The music seemed to understand her pain. It seemed to be telling her that it was okay to grieve, okay to regret, okay to feel. Tears rolled down her cheeks as she finally allowed herself to mourn. Across the room, an older man named Dr. Leonard Ashford stood near the bar. He was 82 years old, with white hair and sharp blue eyes. Dr. Ashford was the founder of the Whitmore Foundation. He had spent his entire life supporting the arts. He had heard the greatest pianists of the 20th century perform. He had sat in the front row at Carnegie Hall over 200 times. He had met legends, shaken their hands, supported their careers, and yet, standing here in this hotel ballroom, Dr. Ashford felt something he had not felt in decades. He felt genuine surprise. He felt awe. The man at the piano was unknown. He was a nobody, a hotel employee playing background music for a charity event, but his playing was extraordinary. It was raw and honest, and deeply personal in a way that polished concert performers rarely achieved. Dr. Ashford moved closer to the piano, drawn by an irresistible force. He needed to see this man's face. He needed to understand who he was and where he had come from. As Marcus began the final build of the ballad, his playing intensified. The notes came faster and faster, tumbling over each other like a waterfall of sound. His fingers flew across the keys with impossible speed and precision. The music was reaching its climax. The moment when everything comes together. It was the moment when all the pain and all the beauty and all the struggle finally explode into one magnificent release. The guests in the ballroom held their breath. Some of them gripped the edges of their tables. Others clasped their hands together as if in prayer. The waiters had abandoned all pretense of working. They stood in clusters, watching with wide eyes. Even the kitchen staff had emerged to listen. They stood in the doorway, dishwashers and prep cooks and line chefs, all united by the power of the music. Rosa was sobbing openly now. She thought about her journey from Guatemala, about the years of hard work, about the dreams she had set aside so her family could survive. The music was honoring her sacrifice. It was telling her that she mattered, that her struggles were seen, that her love was beautiful. Darnell had his arm around one of the kitchen workers, a young man named James who was working his way through community college. They did not know each other well, but in this moment, they were brothers. The music had erased all differences between them. Marcus struck the final chords of the climax with tremendous force. The sound was overwhelming. It filled the ballroom like a thunderclap. Then, slowly, the music began to subside. The storm was passing. The tempest was calming. Marcus played the final section of the ballad with extraordinary tenderness. This was the coda, the closing statement, the final word. It was soft and reflective, like the quiet after a heavy rain. The melody was simple but profound. It spoke of acceptance, of peace, of finding beauty in the brokenness of life. A single tear rolled down Marcus's cheek as he played. He was thinking about his mother. He was thinking about the day she died, about the way she had held his hand and told him she was proud for 30 years. He had carried those words like a burden. He had felt unworthy of her pride. He had felt like he had failed her by giving up his dreams. But now, in this moment, Marcus finally understood. His mother had not been proud of him because of what he might become. She had been proud of him because of who he was. She had been proud of his kindness, his sacrifice, his love. She had been proud that he had chosen her over his dreams. That was not failure. That was the most beautiful kind of success. Marcus played the final notes of the ballad. They hung in the air like stars in a dark sky. Then, slowly, The last echoes faded into silence for a long moment. Nobody moved. The ballroom was completely still. 300 people sat in absolute silence, afraid to break the spell. Then, from the back of the room, someone began to clap. It was Dr. Leonard Ashford, the old philanthropist. His weathered hands came together slowly at first, then faster. Another person joined in, then another within seconds. The entire ballroom was applauding. The sound was deafening. People rose from their seats, one by one, until everyone was standing. It was a standing ovation. 300 of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the city were on their feet, clapping and cheering for the invisible man at the piano. Marcus opened his eyes and looked out at the crowd. He could not quite understand what was happening. For 11 years, nobody had noticed him. Now, everyone was staring at him with tears in their eyes and smiles on their faces. He saw Rosa near the door, clutching Darnell's arm, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. He saw the kitchen workers cheering like he had just won a championship. He saw Mr. Henderson standing near the wall with his mouth hanging open in disbelief. He saw Dr. Ashford walking toward him through the crowd, clapping with each step. Their applause continued. For what felt like an eternity, were shouting bravo and magnificent and more. They were wiping tears from their eyes and hugging each other. They had come to this gala expecting a nice evening and a tax-deductible donation. Instead, they had experienced something truly transcendent. Stood up from the piano bench on shaky legs. He did not know what to do. He had never received a standing ovation in his life. He had never felt the love of an audience pouring over him like warm sunlight. For a moment, he felt like he might collapse. The emotion was too much. The years of invisibility, the sacrifice, the loneliness, and now this sudden overwhelming acceptance. But then he saw his friends near the door, Rosa and Darnell and the others. They were cheering the loudest of all. They were proud of him. They had always been proud of him. And finally, after 30 years of hiding, Marcus allowed himself to be proud too. He bowed his head slightly, accepting the applause. He placed his hand on the piano, thanking the instrument for carrying his story, and he smiled. It was the first genuine smile he had worn in longer than he could remember. The applause finally began to fade, but the energy in the room remained electric. People were turning to each other, asking questions. Who is he? What was that piece? How have we never heard of him before? Marcus did not have answers to these questions. He only knew that something had changed, something fundamental had shifted. In the universe he had been invisible for so long, but tonight, finally, he had been seen, and that made all the difference in the world. Dr. Leonard Ashford had lived a remarkable life. At 82 years old, he had seen more than most people could ever imagine. He had built a fortune from nothing, starting as a poor boy from Brooklyn with holes in his shoes and hunger in his belly. Through hard work and determination and a little bit of luck, he had become one of the wealthiest men in the country. But money had never been his true passion. Music was his passion. Ever since he was a small child, Leonard had loved music more than anything else in the world. His mother used to take him to free concerts in the park. They would sit on the grass with a picnic blanket and listen to orchestras play until the sun went down. Those were the happiest memories of his childhood. When Leonard made his fortune, he knew exactly what he wanted to do with it. Created the Whitmore Foundation, named after his mother's maiden name. The foundation had one simple mission: to support musicians and bring music to people who might never have the chance to hear it otherwise. Over the past 50 years, Leonard had donated hundreds of millions of dollars to music programs around the world. He had funded scholarships for talented young musicians. He had built concert halls in underserved communities, had kept struggling orchestras alive during difficult times. Music was his gift to the world, his way of saying thank you for everything he had been given. Because of his foundation, Leonard had met almost every great pianist of the past half-century, had shaken hands with legends whose names were written in the history books. He had sat in the front row at Carnegie Hall so many times he had lost count. He had heard perfection, and he had heard brilliance, and he had heard technical mastery that seemed almost superhuman. But tonight, standing in the ballroom of the Rosewood Hotel, Leonard Ashford heard something different. He heard truth. The man at the piano was not performing. He was confessing. Every note that came from his fingers was a piece of his soul laid bare for the world to see. There was no pretense, no show, no attempt to impress. There was only raw, honest emotion pouring out like blood from a wound. Who had tears in his eyes as the final notes faded into silence. He could not remember the last time music had made him cry. Perhaps it had been decades. Perhaps it had never. It happened quite like this when the standing ovation began. Leonard was the first to rise. His old bones protested, but he did not care. He clapped his weathered hands together with all the strength he had left around him. 300 people were on their feet. They were businessmen and socialites and politicians and celebrities. They were people who had heard the best musicians in the world perform in the finest venues, and they were all crying and clapping for a man they had never heard of. Before Leonard began walking toward the piano, the crowd parted for him like water parting for a ship. Everyone in the room knew who he was. Everyone in the room respected and admired him. But Leonard was not thinking about any of that. He was thinking only about the man at the piano. Was he? Where had he come from? How was it possible that someone with this much talent was playing background music at a hotel? These questions burned in Leonard's mind as he approached. Marcus was still standing by the piano, looking overwhelmed and confused. He did not seem to understand what was happening. He did not seem to realize that he had just given one of the most remarkable performances Leonard had ever witnessed. Leonard stopped a few feet away from the piano. He looked at Marcus with careful, studying eyes. The pianist was in his 50s, with gray hair at his temples, and lines on his face that spoke of hardship. His black jacket was neat but clearly not expensive. His hands were still trembling slightly from the emotion of his performance. "That was Chopin's Ballade No. 1, Leonard said, his voice rough with emotion. Marcus nodded, still looking dazed. "Yes, sir," he replied quietly. Leonard took another step closer. "Where did you train?" he asked. For a moment, Marcus did not answer. He looked down at his hands, then back up at the old man standing before him. He did not know who this person was, but he could sense that he was someone important. "Juilliard," Marcus finally said. "A long time ago." Leonard's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Juilliard was the most prestigious music school in America. It did not accept just anyone. You graduated from Juilliard?" Leonard asked. "No, sir," Marcus replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "I had to leave 3 months before graduation." There was so much pain in those words. Leonard could hear it as clearly as he had heard the pain in Marcus's music. "What happened?" Leonard asked. Gently. Marcus was quiet for a long moment around them. The crowd was still buzzing with excitement. People were talking about the performance, pointing at Marcus, taking photos with their phones, but Marcus did not notice any of it. Was lost in memories. "My mother got sick," he finally said. "She needed treatment that we could not afford, so I left school to work and pay her medical bills." Leonard nodded slowly. He understood sacrifice. He had made many sacrifices in his own life. "Did she survive?" he asked. Marcus shook his head. "No, she died 2 years later, but at least I was there with her at the end." Leonard felt his heart break for this man. He had met thousands of musicians over the years. Many of them had stories of struggle and sacrifice, but there was something about Marcus's story that hit him differently. Maybe it was the way Marcus spoke about his mother with such love and no regret. Maybe it was the knowledge that this extraordinary talent had been hidden away in a hotel lobby for years. Maybe it was simply that Leonard was 82 years old and had learned to recognize what truly mattered in life after she passed. Leonard said, "You tried to return to music?" Marcus looked surprised that the old man had guessed correctly. As he said, "I auditioned for orchestras and applied to programs, but it was too late. I had been away too long. I was too old. I did not have the right connections anymore. So you came here," Leonard said, gesturing at the ballroom. Marcus nodded. "11 years ago," he said, "I had been playing in the lobby ever since." Leonard was silent for a moment, processing everything he had heard. 11 years. This man had been hiding his gift in a hotel lobby for 11 years. It was a waste. It was something Leonard intended to fix. "I have spent my entire life looking for musicians like you," Leonard said slowly. "I have funded scholarships and built concert halls and supported hundreds of artists." He paused and looked directly into Marcus's eyes. "I thought I had heard them all," Leonard continued. "I thought there were no more surprises left for me. But tonight you proved me wrong." Marcus did not know what to say. He stood there in silence, his heart pounding in his chest. Leonard reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small white card. He pressed it into Marcus's hand. "Call me tomorrow," Leonard said. "This is not over. Not by a long shot." Marcus looked down at the card. It had a name and a phone number printed in elegant gold letters. "Dr. Leonard Ashford, founder of the Whitmore Foundation." Marcus looked up with wide eyes. "You are Leonard Ashford," he said in disbelief. Leonard smiled, a warm and genuine smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "And you are Marcus Chen," he replied. "And the world is about to find out who you are with that." The old philanthropist turned and walked back into the crowd. People immediately surrounded him, asking questions, wanting to know what he had said to the mysterious pianist, but Leonard just smiled and kept walking. He had discovered something precious. Tonight he had found a diamond that had been buried in the dirt for 30 years, and he was going to make sure that diamond finally got the chance to shine. The applause seemed to go on forever. Marcus stood by the piano, still holding Dr. Ashford's card in his trembling hand, as wave after wave of appreciation washed over him. People were not just clapping anymore. They were cheering. They were calling his name. They were reaching out to touch him as if he was some kind of miracle. A woman in a silver dress approached him with tears streaming down her face. "That was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard," she said, her voice breaking. Thank you so much." Before Marcus could respond, another person was there, then another, then another. They surrounded him like a tide, all of them wanting to express their gratitude, their amazement, their joy. Marcus had never experienced anything like this for 11 years. He had been invisible. People had walked past him without a glance. They had talked on their phones while he played. They had treated him like furniture, like part of the decor, like nothing at all. And now these same kinds of people were treating him like a hero. It was overwhelming. It was confusing. It was wonderful and terrifying all at the same time. Across the room, Mr. Henderson stood frozen in place. The hotel manager's face had gone through several colors in the past 20 minutes. First it had been pale with shock, then red with embarrassment. Now it was settling into something that looked like sham. He had told Marcus to keep it simple. He had dismissed him as nothing more than background noise. had looked right through him for 11 years without ever really seeing him, and now he understood what a terrible mistake that had been missed. Henderson began making his way through the crowd toward Marcus. People were still gathered around the pianist, shaking his hand, asking for his name, wanting to know his story. When the manager finally reached him, Marcus looked up with an expression that was impossible to read. "Mr. Chen," Mr. Henderson said, his voice humble in a way it had never been before. "I owe you an apology." Marcus said nothing. He just waited. "I have worked with you for 11 years. The manager continued, "and I never once asked about your background. I never once tried to learn who you really were. I am sorry for that." Marcus considered these words for a moment. He thought about all the times Mr. Henderson had walked past without acknowledging him. He thought about the dismissive instructions to play something. Simply, he thought about the years of invisibility that had slowly eaten away at his soul. But he also thought about his mother. He thought about the lessons she had taught him about kindness and forgiveness. Holding on to anger was like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. That was something she used to say. "It is all right," Marcus finally said. "You did not know, and honestly, I did not let you know. I hid myself away because it was easier than facing the truth." Mr. Henderson nodded, looking relieved and grateful. "From now on," he said, "things will be different. I promise you that." The crowd around Marcus began to thin as people returned to their tables. The gala was supposed to continue, with dinner and speeches and all the usual charity event activities. But there was no doubt that Marcus's performance had become the main event. Everyone was talking about it at every table. Guests were leaning toward each other with excited voices. "Did you see that? Who is that man? Where did he learn to play like that?" The questions flew around the room like birds looking for a place to land near the entrance to the ballroom. Rosa and Darnell and the other staff members were still standing together. They had watched the entire scene unfold with growing amazement. Rosa was wiping her eyes with a tissue. She had cried so much during the performance that her makeup was ruined, but she did not care. She had just witnessed her friend to receive the recognition he had always deserved. "We have to go congratulate him," Darnell said, bouncing on his feet with excitement. Rosa nodded, but she hesitated. "Look at all those fancy people around him," she said. "Maybe we should wait until things calm down." "No way," Darnell replied, grabbing her arm. "He is our friend, and he needs to know we are proud of him together." The group of hotel workers made their way through the ballroom. They must have looked strange. These housekeepers and valets and kitchen staff walking among the wealthy guests. Some people gave them curious looks, others moved aside with barely concealed surprise. But Rosa and Darnell and the others did not care. They had come to support their friend, and nothing was going to stop them. When Marcus saw them approaching, his face broke into a genuine smile. It was the first real smile any of them had seen from him in years. "You came," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Of course we came," Rosa said, pulling him into a tight hug. "We would not miss this for anything in the world." Darnell clapped him on the back. "Man, that was incredible," the young valet said. "I had no idea you could play like that. You have been holding out on us." Marcus laughed, a sound that felt strange and wonderful coming from his throat. "I have been holding out on myself," he admitted, "for a very long time." The kitchen workers gathered around, offering their congratulations. James, the young man working his way through college, shook Marcus's hand with both of his. "You inspired me tonight," James said seriously. "I have been thinking about giving up on school because it is so hard, but watching you up there, I realized that it is never too late to follow your dreams." Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes again. If he had inspired even one person tonight, then everything had been worth it. All the years of hiding, all the pain of giving up his dreams, all of it had led to this moment, and this moment was beautiful. A photographer from the local newspaper approached the group. She had been sent to cover the gala, expecting to take boring photos of rich people writing checks, and she had stumbled onto the story of a lifetime. "Excuse me," she said, holding up her camera. "Would you mind if I took some photos and asked a few questions?" Marcus looked at his friends. Rosa nodded encouragingly. "This is your moment," she said. "Take it." Marcus turned back to the photographer. "All right," he said. "What would you like to know?" The photographer smiled and began asking questions. She asked about his background, his training, his years at the hotel. She asked about the piece he had played and why he had chosen it. She asked about his dreams and his regrets and his hopes for the future. Marcus answered honestly, holding nothing back. He told her about Juilliard and his mother, and the 30 years he had spent in hiding. He told her about Rosa and Darnell and all the invisible workers who had become his family. He told her about choosing love over dreams and learning that sometimes the two were the same thing. The photographer wrote everything down with growing excitement. This was not just a story about a surprise performance at a charity gala. This was a story about redemption. This was a story about second chances. This was a story that would touch the hearts of everyone who heard it. As the interview concluded, Dr. Ashford appeared once again at Marcus's side. The old philanthropist had been watching from across the room, a satisfied smile on his face. "I see you are already becoming famous," Leonard said with a twinkle in his eye. Marcus shook his head in disbelief. "I do not know what is happening," he admitted. "A few hours ago I was just the lobby pianist, and now all of this." Leonard placed a gentle hand on Marcus's shoulder. "Get used to it," he said, because this is only the beginning. Marcus looked at the card, still clutched in his hand the Whitmore Foundation. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know what Dr. Ashford had planned for him, but for the first time in 30 years, Marcus Chen felt something he had almost forgotten was possible. He felt hope. The next morning, Marcus woke up in his small apartment feeling like he was living in a dream. His orange tabby cat was curled up at the foot of the bed as usual. The sun was streaming through the thin curtains as usual. Everything looked the same as it always did, but everything had changed. Marcus lay in bed for a long time, staring at the ceiling and replaying the events of the previous night in his mind. Had it really happened? Had he really played Chopin's Ballade for 300 people? Had he really received a standing ovation? Had he really met the legendary Dr. Leonard Ashford? The business card on his nightstand proved that he had picked it up and looked at it for the 100th time. The elegant gold letters seemed to glow in the morning light. Call me tomorrow, Dr. Ashford had said. Well, tomorrow was now today. Marcus's hands were shaking as he reached for his phone. He had not felt this nervous since his audition for Juilliard all those years ago. What if last night had been a fluke? What if Dr. Ashford had changed his mind? What if this whole thing was just a cruel joke from the universe? But Marcus had made a promise to himself. He had decided to stop hiding, to stop being afraid, to finally let himself be seen. He was not going to break that promise. Now he dialed the number on the card. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times, then a warm voice answered. Dr. Ashford said, "I was hoping you would call." Marcus let out a breath he did not know he had been holding. "Good morning, Dr. Ashford," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Please." The old man replied, "Call me Leonard. After last night I think we are beyond formalities." Marcus smiled, despite his nervousness. "All right, Leonard," he said, "you told me to call, so here I am." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Leonard said slowly, "I have been in the music business for over 50 years. I have heard thousands of pianists perform. I have funded hundreds of careers. And I thought I had seen everything there was to see." He paused again. "But last night you showed me something I had never experienced before." Leonard continued, "You've played with a kind of honesty that is almost impossible to find. You did not perform for the audience. You performed for yourself. And that made all the difference." Marcus felt tears welling up in his eyes. He blinked them back and listened. "I spent all night thinking about you," Leonard said. "I could not sleep. I just kept hearing your music in my head. And I kept thinking about all the years you have been hidden away in that hotel lobby. What a waste. What a tragedy. I made my choice," Marcus said quietly. "I chose my mother over my career. And I would make the same choice again." "No," Leonard replied. "And that is exactly what makes you special. You have your priorities in order. You understand what really matters in life. Most musicians I know are so obsessed with fame and success that they forget to be human beings. But you are different." Marcus did not know what to say. He simply waited for Leonard to continue. "Here is what I am proposing," Leonard said, his voice becoming more businesslike. "I want to sponsor your return to the concert stage." Marcus's heart stopped. "What?" He managed to say. "You heard me," Leonard replied. "I want to fund your comeback. I want to introduce you to the right people. I want to give you the chance you should have had 30 years ago." "But I am 53 years old," Marcus protested. "I have not performed seriously in decades. I play background music in a hotel lobby. It is just a number," Leonard said firmly. "And what you did last night was not background music. That was world-class playing. You have the talent, Marcus. You have always had the talent. You just need the opportunity." Marcus was silent for a long moment. He thought about all the reasons this was a bad idea. He thought about his age, his lack of recent experience, his fear of failure. He thought about all the doors that had been slammed in his face over the years. But then he thought about his mother. He thought about the look of pride on Rose's face last night. He thought about Darnell and James and all the other invisible people who were rooting for him, and thought about how it had felt to finally play from his heart after 30 years of silence. It had felt like coming home. "All right," Marcus said, his voice stronger now. "I am in, whatever you have planned. I am in." Leonard laughed with delight. "Wonderful," he said. "Absolutely wonderful. Now here is what is going to happen for the next hour." Leonard laid out his plan. It was ambitious, almost impossibly so. First, Marcus would need to practice intensively for several months. Leonard would provide access to the finest practice facilities in the city. He would also arrange for coaching from some of the best musicians in the world. Once Marcus was ready, Leonard would use his connections to book a series of small performances, nothing too big at first, just intimate venues where Marcus could rebuild his confidence. Then, if everything went well, Leonard had something special in mind. "I have a friend who sits on the board of the Musikverein in Vienna," Leonard said casually. Marcus nearly dropped the phone. The Music was one of the most famous concert halls in the world. Brahms himself had conducted there. The greatest musicians in history had performed on its stage. "You cannot be serious," Marcus said. "I am completely serious," Leonard replied. "I have already reached out to my friend, and he is very interested in hearing more about you." Marcus felt dizzy. Yesterday he had been a nobody, playing forgettable music for distracted hotel guests. Today he was being offered a path to one of the greatest concert halls on earth. "How is this possible?" he whispered. "Because you deserve it," Leonard said simply. "You have earned this through 30 years of sacrifice and struggle. This is not charity, Marcus. This is justice. The world owes you this chance, and I am just the one lucky enough to help make it happen." Marcus sat in silence. Overwhelmed by emotion, finally he found his voice. "Thank you," he said, those two words carrying the weight of everything he was feeling. "Thank you, Leonard. Do not thank me yet," the old man replied with a chuckle. "You have a lot of hard work ahead of you. We are going to push you harder than you have ever been pushed before. But I have faith in you, Marcus. I know you can do this." After they hung up, Marcus sat on his bed for a long time. Beethoven, the cat, jumped into his lap. Purring contentedly, Marcus stroked the cat's soft fur and let the reality of the situation sink in. His life was about to change completely. Everything he had accepted, everything he had given up on, everything he had buried deep inside himself for 30 years, it was all coming back. It was all becoming possible again. Marcus looked around his small apartment, the worn furniture, the faded curtains, the cramped kitchen. This had been his home for over a decade. It was modest and simple and perfectly adequate for a man who had given up on his dreams, but maybe, just maybe, it would not be his home for much longer. Maybe there were bigger stages waiting for him. Maybe there were concert halls and audiences and standing ovations in his future. Maybe it was not too late. After all, Marcus stood up and walked to the corner of his apartment where an old upright piano stood against the wall. It was not a fancy instrument. The keys were yellowed with age, and some of the notes were slightly out of tune, but it had been his companion through all the lonely years. It had kept his fingers nimble and his heart connected to music even when everything else seemed hopeless. Marcus sat down and placed his fingers on the keys. He began to play, softly at first. Then, with growing confidence, the music filled his small apartment. It drifted out through the thin walls and into the hallway. His neighbors, who had heard him play countless times before, stopped what they were doing to listen. There was something different about his playing today. There was joy in it. There was hope. There was the sound of a man who had finally remembered who he was meant to be. While Marcus was on the phone with Leonard Ashford, something extraordinary was happening on the internet. During the performance at the Whitmore Foundation Gala, a young woman named Sarah Mitchell had taken out her phone. Sarah was the daughter of a wealthy businessman, and she had attended the event reluctantly. She had expected another boring evening of small talk and fake smiles, but when the unknown pianist began to play, Sarah had felt something stirred deep inside her without really thinking about it. She had started recording. Her phone had captured nearly 8 minutes of Marcus's performance. The video was shaky at times, and the audio was not perfect, but it captured something that no professional recording could have matched. It captured the raw, unfiltered emotion of that moment. It captured the tears on the faces of the audience members. It captured the silence that had fallen over the room like a blanket of snow. Had posted the video to her social media accounts late that night with a simple caption, "I just witnessed something magical." By the time she woke up the next morning, the video had been shared over 40,000 times by noon. It had reached 500,000 views by evening. It had crossed the 2 million mark and was still climbing. The internet had discovered Marcus. Comments poured in from all over the world. People were watching the video and crying. They were sharing it with their friends and family. They were asking the same questions over and over again. Who is this man? Where did he come from? Why have we never heard of him before? New websites began picking up the story. They ran articles with headlines like "Hotel Lobby Pianist Stuns Elite Gala" and "Unknown Musician Brings Wealthy Audience to Tears." Television stations sent reporters to the Rosewood Hotel, hoping to get an interview with the mysterious pianist. Marcus was completely unaware of any of this. He had spent the day in a daze, processing his conversation with Leonard Ashford and trying to wrap his mind around what was happening. He did not have any social media accounts. He did not watch the news. He was living in a bubble of his own making, separated from the viral storm that was building around him. It was Rosa who finally told him. She showed up at his apartment that evening with her phone in her hand and an expression of disbelief on her face. She said before he could even say hello, "Have you seen this?" She thrust the phone at him. On the screen was the video of his performance below. It was a number that made no sense. 12 million views. "What is this?" Marcus asked, confused. "It is you," Rosa said, her eyes wide. "Someone filmed your performance and put it on the internet, and it has gone crazy. Everyone is watching it. Everyone is talking about you." Marcus stared at the screen. He watched himself playing the piano in the Rosewood Hotel ballroom. He watched the faces of the audience members as they cried and held their breath. He watched the standing ovation that came at the end. It was surreal, like watching someone else's life. 12 million people have seen this, he said slowly, unable to fully comprehend it. "Is still growing," Rosa replied. "The news channels are calling the hotel asking for interviews. Mr. Henderson does not know what to do. The whole place is going crazy." Marcus sat down heavily on his couch. Beethoven jumped up beside him and rubbed against his arm. "This is too much," Marcus said. "I do not understand how this happened." Rosa sat down next to him and took his hand. "It happened because you are amazing," she said simply. "You have always been amazing, and now the whole world knows it." Over the next few days, Marcus's life became unrecognizable. Reporters camped outside the Rosewood Hotel. They approached him when he arrived for work and followed him when he left. They shouted questions and pointed cameras at his face. "What conservatory did you attend? Why did you leave music? How does it feel to be famous?" Marcus did his Best to avoid them. He was not ready for this kind of attention. He had spent 30 years in the shadows, and the sudden spotlight was blinding, but the story kept growing. It spread from social media to traditional news outlets to international publications. In Europe and Asia ran articles about the American hotel pianist who had touched the hearts of millions. The video continued to rack up views. It crossed 20 million, then 30 million, then 40 million by the end of the week. It had been watched over 80 million times in countries all around the world. People were obsessed with Marcus's story. They loved the idea of hidden talent being discovered. They loved the narrative of a man who had sacrificed his dreams for his mother. They loved the underdog who had finally gotten his moment in the spotlight. Fan accounts appeared on social media. People made tribute videos set to recordings of his performance. A hashtag started trending. Playful Marcus musicians around the world began posting videos of themselves playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in tribute. Marcus watched all of this unfold with a mixture of amazement and terror. He had wanted to be heard, but he had not anticipated being heard by millions. Leonard Ashford called him every day, helping him navigate the chaos. This is exactly what we needed, Leonard said during one of their conversations. The publicity is incredible. Doors that would have taken years to open are opening overnight, but I am not ready, Marcus protested. I need time to practice, to prepare. I cannot just step onto a world stage. You will have time, Leonard assured him. We are going to do this right, but we need to strike while the iron is hot. People's attention spans are short. We need to capitalize on this moment. Leonard was true to his word. Within a week, he had arranged for Marcus to take a leave of absence from the hotel. Mr. Henderson had been more than understanding, probably because the publicity was bringing the Rosewood more attention than it had ever received. Leonard had also arranged for Marcus to have access to a private practice studio. It was a beautiful by space with perfect acoustics and a Steinway concert grand that made Marcus weep the first time he touched it. Tan true to his promise, Leonard had been working his connections. The invitation to Vienna came through just 10 days after the Galatha Musikverein wanted Marcus to perform not as a side act or an opening performance. They wanted him to give a full solo recital in the Golden Hall. It was one of the most prestigious venues in the entire world. Marcus had listened to recordings of concerts in that hall his entire life. He had dreamed of performing there when he was a student at Juilliard, and now, 30 years later, that dream was about to come true. The recital was scheduled for 6 months out. It would give Marcus enough time to prepare a full program and polish his technique. Leonard had assembled a team of coaches and advisors to help him, concert pianists who would critique his playing, music historians who would help him understand the context of his repertoire, even a media trainer to help him handle interviews and public appearances. It was overwhelming. It was terrifying. It was everything Marcus had ever wanted and had forced himself to stop wanting the night before he left for Vienna to begin his intensive preparation. Marcus went to the hotel one last time. He walked through the grand lobby where he had spent 11 years of his life. He touched the black Steinway in the corner. The piano that had been his only friend for so long. Rosa and Darnell and the other staff members gathered to say goodbye, hugged him and cried and told him how proud they were. You better not forget about us when you are famous, Darnell said with a laugh that was only half joking. Marcus replied, looking at each of their faces, you are my family. I could never forget my family. I could never forget my family. Rosa pressed something into his hand. It was a small photograph of the staff members, taken in the break room during someone's birthday party. Marcus was in the picture, sitting in the corner with a small smile on his face. So you remember where you came from, Rosa said, wiping her eyes. Marcus hugged her tightly. I'll never forget. He promised. Everything that is happening to me now started with you. You were the ones who saw me when no one else did. You were the ones who believed in me that night. Marcus boarded a plane to Vienna. He looked out the window. As the city lights grew smaller and smaller below him, he was leaving behind the only life he had known for 30 years. He was flying toward a future he could barely imagine. In his pocket was the photograph of his friends. In his heart was the memory of his mother, and in his fingers was the music that had been waiting patiently all these years to finally be heard. 6 months had passed since the night that changed everything. Marcus stood backstage at Carnegie Hall in New York City, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit. His hands were steady, his breathing was calm, his heart was full of something that felt like peace. Through the curtain, he could hear the murmur of 2,000 people taking their seats. They had come from all over the world to see him perform. Tickets had sold out within minutes of going on sale. The concert had been called the most anticipated classical music event of the decade. Marcus still could not quite believe it was real. So much had happened in the past half year. The Vienna performance had been a triumph beyond anything Marcus could have imagined. He had played in the Golden Hall of the Musik, the same hall where Brahms and Mahler and countless other legends had performed. The audience had given him a 12-minute standing ovation. Critics had called his playing transcendent, soul-stirring, unlike anything they had ever heard. After Vienna, the offers had poured in. Concert halls in London, Paris, Tokyo, Sydney, Berlin. Everyone wanted the hotel pianist who had captured the world's heart. Marcus had performed in all of them. Each concert was different, and each was special in its own way, but tonight was the most special of all. Tonight Marcus Chen was performing at Carnegie Hall. It was the dream he had held in his heart since he was a young student at Juilliard. It was the dream he had given up 30 years ago, and now, against all odds, it was coming true. Leonard Ashford appeared. At his side, the old philanthropist had been with Marcus every step of the way. He had become more than a sponsor. He had become a mentor, a friend, a second father. "How are you feeling?" Leonard asked. Marcus smiled. "Ready," he said simply. Leonard nodded and squeezed his shoulder. "Your mother would be so proud of you," he said quietly. Marcus felt the familiar sting of tears in his eyes. He thought about his mother every day. He thought about her sacrifice and her love and her unwavering belief in him. He wished more than anything that she could be here tonight, but in a way, he knew she was. She was in every note he played. She was in every breath he took. She was the reason he was standing here at all. "There is something I want to show you," Leonard said, leading Marcus toward the edge of the curtain. He pulled the fabric back just enough for Marcus to see the front row of the audience, and there they were, in a beautiful dress she had probably saved for months to afford. Darnell, looking handsome and proud in a suit and tie. James, the young man who had been inspired to keep pursuing his education, and a dozen other faces Marcus knew by heart, the housekeepers and kitchen workers and valets from the Rosewood Hotel. "His family, I bought them all tickets," Leonard said, "and flew them here. I thought you should know they were watching." Marcus could not speak. Tears were streaming down his face now, and he did not try to stop them. These were the people who had seen him when he was invisible. These were the people who had believed in him when he had stopped believing in himself, and now they were sitting in the front row of Carnegie Hall, waiting to watch him fulfill a dream that had been 30 years in the making. "Thank you," Marcus finally managed to say, "for everything." Leonard smiled and handed him a tissue. "Now go out there and show them what you have got," he said. Marcus dried his eyes and straightened his jacket. He took one last deep breath. Then he walked out onto the stage. The applause that greeted him was thunderous too. 1,000 people rose to their feet before he had even played a single note. They clapped and cheered and called his name. Marcus stood at the edge of the stage, looking out at the sea of faces. He saw strangers who had been moved by his story. He saw fellow musicians who had come to hear him play. He saw journalists and critics and celebrities and ordinary people who just loved music. And in the front row, he saw Rosa wiping her eyes and Darnell pumping his fist and all his friends from the hotel beaming with pride. Marcus bowed deeply, honoring the audience as they had honored him. Then he walked to the piano and sat down. The hall fell silent. 1,000 people held their breath. Marcus placed his fingers on the keys of the Steinway concert grand. He thought about his mother. He thought about the broken keyboard she had brought home all those years ago. He thought about the 11 years he had spent being invisible. He thought about the night at the Rosewood Hotel when he had finally decided to let himself be heard. And then he began to play. The music flowed from his fingers like water from a spring. It filled the great hall with beauty and emotion and truth. Marcus played piece after piece, each one a chapter in the story of his life. He played Chopin and Liszt and Rachmaninoff. He played the ballad number 1 that had started it all, and for his encore, he played a simple lullaby that his mother used to sing to him when he was small. He had arranged it for piano himself, and he had never performed it for anyone before, but tonight felt right. Tonight felt like the perfect moment to honor the woman who had made everything possible. When the final note faded into silence, the audience erupted. The ovation was even longer and louder than Vienna. People were crying and laughing and embracing each other. It was not just applause, it was celebration, it was gratitude, it was love. Marcus stood and bowed again and again. He looked at Rosa and Darnell and his hotel family. They were on their feet, cheering louder than anyone. Later that night, after the crowds had gone and the hall had emptied, Marcus found himself alone on the stage. The cleaning crew had given him a few minutes of privacy. He sat at the piano one last time and looked out at the empty seats. He thought about how far he had come. He thought about the broken boy who had left Juilliard with a shattered heart. He thought about the invisible man who had played background music for 11 years. He thought about the 50th who had finally found the courage to be seen. The journey had been long and painful and beautiful. It had cost him everything and given him everything back. Journalist had asked him earlier that day what lesson he had learned from his experience. Had thought about it for a long moment before answering. "They asked me for background music," it said. "They asked for something simple and forgettable, but I realized that every person deserves to be heard. I just had to decide to hear myself first." The journalist had written that quote down. Marcus suspected it would be in all the articles tomorrow, but the real answer was even simpler than that. The real answer was love. His mother had loved him enough to sacrifice everything. His friends at the hotel had loved him enough to see him when no one else did. Leonard Ashford had loved music enough to give a stranger a second chance. And Marcus had finally loved himself enough to stop hiding. That was the real lesson. That was the truth at the heart of everything. Marcus stood up from the piano and walked to the edge of the stage. In his pocket was the photograph of his hotel family. In his heart was the memory of his mother, and in his soul was music that would never be silent again. He had asked for nothing more than to be a background player, but life had given him something extraordinary. Instead, it had given him a second chance. It had given him a voice. It had given him proof that it is never too late to become who you were always meant to be. Marcus Chen turned off the stage lights and walked out into the New York night above him. The stars were shining bright somewhere. He knew his mother was watching, and she was proud. The end.